Welcome to my channel. Helios Airways Flight 522. Helios Airways Flight 522 was a scheduled passenger flight, which departed from Larnaca Airport in Cyprus, and was traveling to Prague. It was due to have a stopover at Athens in Greece on its way to Prague. Helios Airways Flight 522 was set to depart at 9 a.m. on August 14, 2005. It was due to arrive at Athens at 10:45 that day. In the cockpit was Captain Hans-Jürgen Merton, aged 59. He had 35 years flying experience. First officer was 51-year-old Pampos Karalambis. Also on board was 32-year-old Luisa Vuderi. He had replaced a sick colleague as chief flight attendant. The previous flight crew had reported a frozen door seal and strange noises coming from the right aft service door on their flight. Ground crew inspected the aircraft and performed a pressurization leak test. The aircraft's engines needed to be set to manual in order for the test to be carried out. However, the engineer failed to reset this back to auto once he had completed the test, and the aircraft was put back into service. However, during the flight checks, none of the flight crew on board noticed this mistake, and the aircraft continued to depart. Helios Airways Flight 522 continued to climb, unaware that the pressure inside the cabin was gradually decreasing. Once the aircraft had passed the altitude of 12,040 feet, an altitude warning sound begun. This is supposed to make the captain stop the aircraft from climbing any further, but it is believed that the crew misidentified the warning and thought it was a takeoff configuration warning instead. The aircraft continued to climb further. It is then believed that other warning lights came on in the overhead panel. This included the passenger oxygen light. The aircraft was now at 18,000 feet. This is when it is believed that the passenger oxygen masks deployed. The captain is then believed to have radioed the Helios Operations Center and reported the warning lights. He was told by the Operations Center to check the pressurization panel was set to auto, but by this time, all those inside the cockpit were already experiencing the onset of hypoxia systems, and didn't answer his question. This would be the last communication with the aircraft. The aircraft continued to climb to 34,000 feet. Several attempts were made to contact the aircraft, but they received no response. At 10:40, the aircraft entered a holding pattern for Athens Airport, and would remain there for another 70 minutes. Still in autopilot. Still no contact could be made with the aircraft. It was now that two F-16 fighter planes were scrambled to check on what was going on with the aircraft. The F-16s intercepted the Helios aircraft at 11:24, and witnessed the first officer slumped over the controls. The captain's seat was empty. They could also see that the oxygen masks had been deployed inside the passenger cabin. It was now clear that there was something very wrong with this aircraft. It was thought to have been at 11:49 that a flight attendant made his way to the cockpit and sat in the captain's seat. He had managed to remain conscious using a portable oxygen supply. He waved at the F-16s, but it wasn't long after this that the left engine flamed out, and the aircraft began to descend. Just 10 minutes later, the right engine also flamed out. The flight attendant was unable to gain control of the aircraft and sadly, just before 12:04 that day, Helios Airways Flight 522 crashed into the hillside near Grammatico, killing all those on board. There had been 115 passengers and 6 crew members on board the flight that day. 118 bodies were recovered, but many of those bodies had been burned beyond recognition. The flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder were quickly located, but had to be sent to Paris for further analysis. The bodies of the victims showed that they had been alive at the time of the crash, but it was unclear whether or not they had been conscious. Hellenic Air Accident Investigation and Aviation Safety Board determined the events leading up to the fatal crash. They believed that the crew could not be contacted during the flight due to hypoxia, which eventually led to fuel starvation of the aircraft, and it was after this that the aircraft made its final descent. It was in 2011 that the Federal Aviation Administration required all Boeing 737s to be fitted with 2 additional cockpit warning lights, to help indicate problems with takeoff configuration and pressurization problems. Families of the victims filed a lawsuit against Boeing in 2007. It was in 2008 that a prosecutor charged 6 employees with manslaughter. In December 2008, Helios Airways and 4 of its officials were also charged with 119 counts of manslaughter. However, the case was eventually dismissed and the defendants acquitted. An appeal against this was filed, but again would eventually be dropped under the double jeopardy rules. In December 2009, however, a new trial would begin against Chief Executive Dimitris Pantazis, Flight Operations Manager Georgos Kikidis, former Chief Pilot Lanko Stoimenov, and Chief Engineer Alan Irwin. They were all charged with manslaughter. It was in April 2012 that all were found guilty and sentenced to just 10 years. However, under Greek law, the defendants were given the option of buying out their sentences, and in 2013, each of them paid €75,000 and were set free. For the relatives of those on board Helios Airways 522, they say that this is not over for them, as those at fault were not punished, and the sentences given to those responsible was just humiliating. The cause of the crash of Flight 522 was blamed on human error. Relatives of the victims hold a memorial each year, in a church which was erected near to the crash site, in memory of those on board Flight 522. Our hearts go out to the families of Helios Airways Flight 522. May your loved ones always be remembered. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my channel to view other content.